dat to you and welcome in, Who Dat Nation, to the 752nd episode of the Who Dat Confessional podcast, where today we're going to talk about what the New Orleans Saints can potentially do to continue to improve their roster, kind of building on what we talked about to end last episode, where the New Orleans Saints obviously have done a few moves to improve the roster, but would argue, and I think most people would agree, there's more they still can do. So we're going to talk about what they can do in the draft a little bit, but mostly focusing on my favorite, free agency. I say my favorite because free agency is, it's the stepping stone, right? Like, I love the draft process, and I always have. And I don't know if the draft will ever get replaced for me in terms of like my love for scouting. In terms of building a great roster, free agency, that's where it happens. That's where the good roster gets made. So I'm excited about that. But the New Orleans Saints do currently have the 14th, 45th, 150th, 168th, 170th, 175th, 190th, 199th, and 239th picks in the NFL draft. But still plenty of people that they could potentially take a look at in free agency. We're going to talk about a few of those today. With you have like Emmanuel Ogbah, defensive end. You've got Hunter Renfrow, the wide receiver, obviously connected to Derek Carr. Got Xavier Howard at corner, Justin Simmons at safety. There are a lot of free agents still available today. Who's best? Who's left? Well, we'll discuss all those and kind of go over what that could mean for the Saints and who's viable, because personally, I don't like picking up big name guys all the time. I can understand why. Justin Simmons is one we talked about. We'll talk about that more, but let's get some shout outs to those who are here in the chat. DJ Twigger, Creole King, Mr. Jerry. As always, Mr. Jerry, appreciate you, love you for being just so devoted to all New Orleans Saints podcasts. That's pretty rare. It's pretty dope. Brian W. the second. Good to see you. Rampage here. James Griffon, Rudy Rock coming in with the big Who Dat. Good to see you. Let's see. All of our folks. Good to see TJ. Good to see you in the chat, and more to come. So let's talk about some of the big names that are available. I'm going to rattle off a few different lists, but y'all can just kind of say, hey, here's some names, didn't know they were available, or did know they were available, and say, I would like the New Orleans Saints to go after them. Kind of give y'all a little bit of catch up in case y'all haven't gotten it yourself. Justin Simmons, safety. Personally, like Justin Simmons, not necessarily a priority for me because I want the New Orleans Saints to get younger at the position. But Justin Simmons is a starter quality free safety right now. You got Stephon Gilmore, another longtime veteran. You got Steve Nelson. You've got Connor Williams, a center who I don't think the New Orleans Saints need unless they just believe that they could make him work at left guard. He did. And the reason I bring up Connor Williams, by the way, is Connor Williams started his career as a left guard with the Dallas Cowboys and is very familiar with zone blocking. So just a thought there. So Xavier Howard, you've got Mekhi Becton, the New York Jets at left tackle. That's one that I think could be pretty big deal. So great athleticism when he came out of the draft, and then obviously has had some issues. But revolving door quarterbacks is not going to make anybody look good over there in New York. You've got Dalton Risner out of Minnesota, another guard. You've got Julian Blackmon, the safety from the Colts. You got Odell Beckham Jr. So I'm just giving y'all names to kind of like think of, like, would we like the New Orleans Saints to go after them? Tyler Boyd from Cincy, Adoree Jackson, another corner out of New York, Calais Campbell, who, if they get him to not retire, was with the Falcons, and I would say had a good run towards the end of his career with the Falcons. If you want veteran additions to the defensive line, all these are legitimate options. You got Carl Lawson at edge, who, if you want to add to the edge rotation even more without spending big money, you've also got Deontay Hardy, who can make a return to New Orleans. Even though you have Rashid Shaheed, having Deontay Hardy there, maybe you decide Rashid or Deontay has specific return duties, whichever way you want to do it. Names to keep in mind. And of course, Michael Thomas is free agents, but I don't expect him to come back. Anyway, there's a whole list of names, and there are more names than that, but there are a whole slew of names that could come to the New Orleans Saints or might fit. My only thing with a lot of these is not that I think that any of them are bad, because I don't think any of them are bad, but I will say that when it comes to adding to the roster, I would rather they have younger, up-and-coming type of things than older. And that isn't to say that I am opposed to a guy like Justin Simmons. I just think that Jordan Howard looked good in reps. I would rather have young competition come in. That's just me. I am glad the New Orleans Saints did not make huge moves that I personally disagree with, such as Saquon Barkley to the Philadelphia Eagles. Gave Saquon 3 years, like $38 million? Could be worth up to $46 million. More power to him. But I'm glad New Orleans didn't make that type of a move. Bad. Would have been okay with Patrick Queen coming to the New Orleans Saints, but he went to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm okay with that. You've also got some moves that were kind of like sketch or meh, right? Like Kenneth Murray Jr. and Tony Pollard going to the Tennessee Titans. Yeah, I don't know exactly how that fits, but we'll just have to wait and see. Murray's deal is like $9 million a year for 2 years. It just seems so much for me, but we'll discuss. Creo says, Dave Bakhtiari. I'm pretty sure Bakhtiari is retired. Pretty sure Bakhtiari is going to hang up the cleats, right? We'll verify. Let me double check that. But isn't Dave Bakhtiari just going to hang it up, man? Isn't he just going to hang it up? Because I know he's a free agent, but isn't he done? Isn't he just done, period? Oh, he got cut. That's sad times. You know what? Maybe he goes to New York, hangs out with his friend Aaron Rodgers. He wants to play. Well, he can want to play. I remember I was reading an article, I think it was like last week, talking about how he really wished that surgery would have, what was it? It was with SB Nation's Acme Packing Company. And the article was covering what Dave Bakhtiari had told ESPN, which in short was that an early surgery would have saved a couple years of problems and stuff for them, and specifically for him. But he'll turn 33 this year, if I remember right, and that's pretty old. I don't know how much he's honestly got left in the proverbial tank. I mean, more power to him, because you have seen guys maintain in the league right now, such as Big Smith, but I'm New Orleans. That's not my answer. So, and again, I'm not trying to sound like an ageist here, but I do think that in a league that is built around, and I just believe that in a league that's built around youth in a lot of ways, I don't feel like you're finding a lot of youth there. I feel like there are still some solid players who are veterans. I think Justin Simmons is one of those players. If the New Orleans Saints brought in Justin Simmons, I do feel like he fits a need and fits well. I just worry about him being older, right? Like you see, it's one of those things like you'll see a stat, and Justin Simmons has one of these stats that make you go, wow, that sounds so great, until you realize like, oh, it took a lot of time to make that happen. No player has more interceptions since 2016 than Justin Simmons. But then you think about that for a second. That's 7 NFL years for a skill position player. How likely is it that he can continue that level of success? Doesn't mean he can't. But it does mean you go, well, that looks great. But are you willing to bank that he still has it where he's going to be 31 this season? And he is coming off a Pro Bowl year and an All-Pro year. So maybe he can. But nobody has more interceptions since 2016 than Justin Simmons. Yet, the man's been in the league 8 years. So can he still provide? I think that it's an okay addition. Like, I would not fight it. I would have no issue with it. But I would also say, if you're the New Orleans Saints, you need to find a way to find a mixture of experience and youth. So, like, Justin Simmons is probably the best player still available. If I had to, like, just rate them based on purely on-field ability, he's probably the best in terms of, like, what you see him do on paper. I would probably lean more towards Julian Blackmon. Why would I lean towards Julian Blackmon? He's younger by a lot. He's 25. I think he turns 26 this season. Now, he's not played full seasons before. It was 2021. He only played like 6 games, something like that. And I don't think he's as good of a player as Justin Simmons is. However, one thing I do believe in, Dennis Allen's ability and scheme to bring out the best of a skill position player on defense. I just think that he has done wonders with a lot of people at corner and safety, whether they're high-profile players or low-profile players. Like we complain about the Janoris Jenkins and Eli Apples when they were here. That's fine. We could complain about them all day long. But we cannot act like under Dennis Allen, they did not have really good years, right? That doesn't mean that I think that Eli Apple was secretly a great player and we should have kept him. That's not what I'm arguing at all. But I am saying that if you can compare his years with New Orleans against most of his career, he had some of his best years here when we're talking about like rating against and things like that. You know, I think that Dennis Allen can bring a lot out of a player, even though I don't believe Eli Apple is a quality player. Like, I don't believe Eli Apple is a top corner in this league in any way, shape, or form. But I do believe that if you look at him year after year, I think that Eli Apple is pretty good because of the scheme that he was in. And to give an example of that, just to give you some numbers real quick, in 2018, when we brought him in, quarterback rating against Eli Apple was 72.6, and he only allowed 44% of the passes thrown his way to be completed. Now, why do those numbers matter at all? Well, how about we do a quick comparison? How about we do 2022 with Cincy? How did he do then? Well, 2022 with Cincy, he gave up a 97 quarterback rating, and 57% of the passes thrown his way were completed. And it should be pointed out that he's only 27 years old in that year. And that's the year that the Cincinnati Bengals are really good. They ended up winning the division. You know, didn't manage to win a Super Bowl or anything because they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs in the conference championship. But, you know, you get what I'm saying. You have a very good defensive coach, especially with secondary. So maybe you could get a guy like Blackman, who's younger than a Justin Simmons, and have him come in and compete and maybe have some success there instead of going for the older veteran who's probably more of a quote-unquote guarantee, but you can't really build a future off of him, where you can build a future off of Blackman if he can be healthy, right? If he can play a full season, then you can get a lot more long-term out of him that you're simply just not going to get out of Justin Simmons. You know, Julian Blackman, by the way, last year played 15 games and started all 15 games. And the year before that, he played 14 games. You are looking at a guy who's not showing 17-game seasons. And I know that for a lot of Saints fans, that's a huge no. If that's a huge no for you, I get it. But I like that he won't be 31 like Justin Simmons will. And Justin Simmons has not played a 17-game season since 2021 anyway. He also has missed games here and there, including the year that he led the league in interceptions, 2022. He only played 12 games. So it's kind of like taking what you will and what has more value to you when you're building your roster. But I think that there are some positions that I would need to trust quality players because I don't necessarily trust the coaching staff. An example of that, offensive line. I think the offensive line coaching staff has moved in a better direction this year, but I don't know it until I know it, right? So Connor Williams, who tore his ACL last year, we've definitely seen veterans come back and play off a torn ACL and do well. I love his versatility. However, is he ready to go? So for those that don't know much about Connor Williams, he played left guard for 4 years with Dallas, and then he was a center for 2 years with Miami. He started 77 games, and he's only 26 years old. Turned 27 sometime this year. I'm willing to get that as a low-budget, low-cost offensive line signing and make that happen, right? Nothing wrong with that. I'm good with that. This is me personally. But I also know that I'm signing him for depth and to work in the rotation. I'm not expecting him to come in and be an immediate starter. Derek Powell says, sign Justin Simmons, move on from Pete, and then draft left tackle with the first pick. Well, they've already moved on from Andres Pete. Andres Pete is a free agent. As far as drafting a left tackle, my only thing is I don't think it's good to go into the season or go into the draft picking a position. I think that's dangerous. I do think there are times where you need to draft a position, but I also think it needs to match up to BPA. If a offensive lineman is the best player available on your draft board, absolutely take him. But don't go in just saying, hey, we have got to get a left tackle. Just don't do that. I personally would be very hesitant to do that because I think that it opens up too many doors of potential failure. And We have already got a left tackle that we drafted at a high round that is not playing out as anticipated. And again, I'm not trying to just trash talk Trevor Penning because I am hoping that he can be better once we actually get started, right? Like once we get into free agency and once we actually get a whole team going, he'll be fine, hopefully. But if that's not the case, then you do what you got to do. But you're sitting at pick 14. It's quite possible that you have pretty good options available. And look at a guy like maybe Joe Alt out of Notre Dame or Fuaga out of Oregon State. If that's high on your board, absolutely do that. You find very regularly good value offensive linemen in the teens. Like you just do. You find good players there. You also tend to find good defensive linemen there. So if you liked Dallas Turner, if you're out there, you like Dallas Turner out of Alabama, well, he'll probably be in that circle. Like he'll be somewhere in that 10 to 20 range, probably. Could be, maybe he drops further. Maybe you like Byron Murphy. But I love getting offensive and defensive linemen in the first round. I'm a huge fan of getting offensive and defensive linemen in the first round. So I think that's completely okay if it lines up with what you're doing. As long as you're not taking Brock Bowers at pick 14, which I kind of talked about on Tuesday, how I'm not a fan of that, I'm good. But you could also go crazy. And again, it's based on like where you have actually like valued a guy, where your scouting department has said, this is who's top on our board. And what if top on their board is Brian Thomas Jr.? What if? Like, what do you do in that situation? Now, I'm not saying that's the case. In fact, some of y'all may be going like, that's crazy, Rev. Why would they do something like that? Well, I'll tell you this. If you look at the wide receivers that we know for a fact they have focused on, height, weight, speed, etc., it's the Brian Thomas type wide receiver. That's what they've clearly put a lot of effort into looking into. And then obviously he put out nuts numbers last year with LSU. What was he at, like 17 touchdowns? Now, I don't think that he's the same traditional split in as other guys, but in terms of the height weight frame that he has and how he could fit, I do think that he could fill that role. I think that he could, do some things maybe a little better, toughen up a little bit more. And when I say toughen up, I mean, get a little bit more muscle on the body, but just saying that it's all about who's best on your list, right? And then you get into that pick 45 range and you can maybe say, well, what do we do now? Well, maybe now you can actually get another backup edge rusher, or maybe you can actually get an offensive lineman. For example, Zach Frazier is one that I've looked at a little bit here recently out of West Virginia, probably a guy that goes in the second round. And interior offensive lineman, whether you're looking at center or guard, whoever you find that kind of fits what you're looking for. Christian Hayes out of UConn. Whichever move you want to make, I think there's going to be options for the Saints to make those moves. It's all about who's the best player available for you. Right? Ted says left tackle first round, right tackle second round. See, my personal opinion, Ted, is if you draft that way, as in we're drafting specifically, like if that truly, this is what I believe, and I'm not trying to like say this in a you're wrong type of way. If you go into a draft and your entire draft is literally built around the idea of we're simply going to draft this position because we need it, so whoever's the best right tackle left, you've probably drafted a worse player at that position. So the value of who you drafted at right tackle at pick 45, they were probably like more of a top 100 player, not a top 50 player by that point in the draft. So if it falls into like alignment where you are getting, the player you want, then sure, run it. But if you're not getting the player that you want, don't do that, right? Like just be very, very picky about what you go after, I think is kind of more what I'm trying to get at. I think if you go from the BPA argument to the need argument, and this is why the free agency period is so important for me and why I wanted to talk about it here tonight on the show. Free agency is so big because it helps you prevent yourself from getting into a situation where you have to just take this guy. There's only one position that I would say you can kind of like universally take and not worry too much about it. and that's probably running back. Everything else, though. So, but Teddy, like you say, only of good value. But at what point, and this is an internal discussion, at what point do you override BPA? Like, at what point does BPA no longer have the power that it did before? So, for example, let's say you want to trade up into the third round. It's possible that you could use 3 fifth-round picks and a fourth-round pick to get into the third. You'd be giving up a lot of numbers, but you could probably make that choice. And then with that choice, you could maybe still get a quality developmental offensive lineman to throw in your rotation, like when the Saints drafted Nick Saldiveri, who they anticipate to become a starter at some point, but maybe isn't a starter ready to go right now. You could possibly find that there, or you want to, maybe you don't believe in Juwan Johnson because of last year kind of had what I hate to call it a falling off, but he definitely didn't play to the anticipated level that many people were hoping he would. So maybe you move on from that and look at a tight end. But then when you talk tight end, just like I said the other night, I personally don't want to take a tight end unless I'm taking them, in the second, third, fourth round. I don't want a first round tight end. I'm extremely frightened by the idea of a first round tight end. I don't believe first round tight ends are good tight ends. I don't. I know that's probably terrible to say, but I don't believe that first round tight ends is ever a good pick. And I've seen a lot of first round tight ends get drafted. I just don't believe that's a good pick personally. I think that the best players, in terms of like when you pick them, it's all about getting best player available, but also that BPA has to coincide with something that's actually going to provide for you day one. For me, a first round pick, even though I always say, and I still believe this, I'm not backtracking on anything, I always say when it comes to first round picks, they need to be able to produce day one. And I also say that I don't really judge a guy till year 3, but you still expect a player that if you draft in year 1 is going to contribute in some form or fashion in year 1 if they're in the first round. You just expect that. Why not move Juwan Johnson split in? It's a different position entirely. I don't think it fits him very well. I think he's a natural running back. I do realize that he has wide receiver history, but I think he's better at that flex tight end spot than if he was trying to be a wide receiver. Truth is, even though I like Juwan Johnson has some really good move sets for a flex tight end, but just because you have good move sets for a flex tight end doesn't mean it means you're good at split end. And I don't think he honestly is or would be that great as a split end. Just like Jimmy Graham was a great flex tight end, but I don't think you could have ever just gone and be Marcus Colston. Well, you would have some plays where you lined them up in those spots, and that's completely fine. But yeah, I don't think you'd be finding the same level of success there. That's just me. That's just me. But I am still really curious. He's too slow to move back. Speed is an issue, but you don't always need great speed from a split end, right? I mean, Michael Thomas is a great example. He's a mid 4.5s runner. So I don't think he's in that conversation even. So yeah. Favorite tight end was Shockey. Shockey's a great tight end historically. Shockey's a great tight end. But Connor Williams or Mekhi Becton is who they should target free agent wise. I'm okay with both of those, Calvin. It's just kind of a mixed bag for me because I don't believe either one of them answers the Saints' questions for various reasons. Becton, I don't know if he's a long-term answer. I have no issue with going after him. And Connor Williams, how healthy is he? But I've mentioned both of them already and like both of them. That said, how much do you believe in Becton? Personally, how much do you believe in Becton? Do you believe that he comes in, starts right now, and is the player of the future for New Orleans? And do you believe that he can play it consistently? And if you do, I got zero issue with that logic. Connor Williams is my same thing. Like, I like Connor Williams a lot, but the man's coming off a torn ACL. How much do you trust that moving forward? Becton, I think, is hyper athletic. There's a reason he was drafted 11th overall a couple years ago, but talking about a guy that played last year, but didn't do very well, and didn't play at all in 2021 because of injury. How much do you trust it? Absolutely okay with both of those guys being brought in. And this is kind of where I would put them in the same stratosphere of signing them after the draft. Like they're part of the opportunity to be a starter. Best thing I can use to like reference point is I loved the New Orleans Saints signing Trey Turner. Most of you will forget that Trey Turner signed with the New Orleans Saints. 5-time Pro Bowler with Carolina. Ended up going and playing with the Chargers afterwards. Then bounced around a couple teams and came to New Orleans. But didn't play a single down in New Orleans because he ended up having to get put on IR, sadly, due to an injury in practice. But that was a late signing. It was a late signing. That type of signing, I love. We signed Trey Turner in, I think, July. I think July is when we signed Trey Turner. After the draft. That was a Pro Bowl level player who was still young-ish. Because I think he was 29 when we brought him in. So he wasn't that old. Former Pro Bowl level talent, but it had some issues, right? It wasn't playing full seasons, had gone through some injury problems. I'm okay with that. It's the same thing with Connor Williams. Completely. If Connor Williams got signed at the end of April, May, whatever, right after the draft, okay, absolutely. And he very well could earn a spot on the team. And y'all watched the New Orleans Saints in 2023. Would a healthy Trey Turner have played on the field? I think he would have. I think Trey Turner would have seen snaps in 2023 had he not gone down on the IR with a practice injury. But I think when you have these type of veterans who have a little bit of injury history, I think those are the type of moves you make after the draft, not before the draft. That's just me. Yeah. And you're right, Creole. Turner will be 31 this football season. When New Orleans signed him, he was 29, I think. He was 29. But regardless, that's, we see offensive linemen that play into their early 30s. So you would have think for a veteran, you probably would have had 2 or 3 years out of him if he worked out well. So, and yeah, Julian Blackmon is younger, Calvin, but also has that same issue with like, hey, is he going to play all 17 games for you? And I mentioned him earlier. I personally like Blackmon more than I would go after Justin Simmons. But, yeah. Personally. Turner will be 31 this football season. Noted. All right. Let's see. Is there a DT worth taking at 14? So I would say no. Here's why. If you're going to take a defensive tackle in the top 15, there are 3 tech. The New Orleans Saints just drafted that. His name is Brian Brzee. Or Brian Breezy. So no. I do not believe in drafting one techs in the top 15. I absolutely do not. And Brian Brzee was drafted at 29. Right? Now, if I could go back in time, would I draft Brian Brzee at 14? I would. I actually would. I think he's that good. He had that good of a rookie year. I think he has that level of potential. But he's a 3 tech. I will never draft a 1 tech in the top 20. And there are sometimes exceptions to this rule. Sometimes. An exception to that rule would be Vita Vea. There's a legitimate argument for drafting Vita Vea in the top 15, even though he's a 1 tech. But even then, I still probably wouldn't have done it. But Vita Veas are rare. There aren't many Vita Veas coming out. And even when they do, you still have a lot of teams that look at him and go, hey, I'd take you in the 2nd all day long. Tampa took him in the 1st. And Vita Vea has been fantastic. But he still has only got 1 Pro Bowl. And he's got 23.5 career sacks, even though he is an absolutely stout run stuffer. He's the very rare 1 tech who can also be a pass rusher. It reminds me of Vince Wilfork. Vince Wilfork was drafted in the 1st round, but he was drafted like the end of the 1st round. He was special. And if you got a guy who's special at 1 tech who you think could be an all-pro at his position, sure. But top 15? Yeah, I wouldn't. So short answer that I turned into a long answer, no. There is nobody that I would draft for the New Orleans Saints that plays defensive tackle because you've already invested in your 3 tech of the future. You wouldn't get another guy to compete with Brian Brzee, and you're not going to replace Colin Saunders in the top 15 picks. I feel like that would be a poor decision. The example that I've brought up the most over the years is my high school mate, as in we went to high school together, Justin Ellis. Justin Ellis was drafted in the 4th round by the then Oakland Raiders. Justin Ellis played in the league for 9 years. Most of you have never heard of his name because most people don't listen or hear one techs. Yeah, there are some one techs that people are like, that dude's badass, like Snacks Harrison. Most people know Snacks. But we're talking about like if you had to name all 32 nose tackles in the NFL, could you do it? I can almost guarantee nobody in this chat could because I can't do it. And I strongly believe nobody else can as well. But Justin Ellis had a 9-year career with 3 different teams as a nose tackle. You're talking about a guy who had 100 solo tackles in 9 years because he's a nose tackle. He's a space eater, right? In his entire career, he had 5 QB hits and 1.5 sacks. Played in the league for 9 years. If you want a one tech, that's a quality one tech. Now, it's not like an amazing Vita Vea one tech, but like if you got to choose between your one tech, would you rather draft a linebacker at 14 who has the potential to be an all-pro or a nose tackle at 14 who has the potential to be all-pro? It's just positional value. Just like running back, you get your one tech later in the game. You get your Justin Ellis and your Alvin Kamara in round 3 or round 4. So, yeah, turn that into a very long answer. All right, but yeah, do you think the Saints will address tight end in the draft? I think the Saints should address tight end if that's the best player available. I think the Saints need to approach this as BPA as possible. That's my goal. Let us know if Devondre Sweat still there at 45. You're running to the stand. That's fine. Okay. Would I do the same thing? No, not at all. Not at all. I wouldn't do the same thing. I wouldn't run to the stand for him. But if you think he's that special, that's cool. I mean, I know he ran like a 5'2" 40 and he weighs 360 pounds, which is nuts impressive. That's crazy impressive. So I get it. But if you ask me, would I do it? I still probably wouldn't take him. Mainly because we already have the position filled. I still think he's good. Like, I think he could be really good. And one thing let me give some flowers to him. The dude does a really good job of playing, like availability. I like that. I like it. But he's not going to be a guy that gets pressure in the NFL. Like, he's not going to get a lot of sacks. There's a couple of reasons why he's going to struggle to get sacks on the interior. Because he's a big-bodied defensive tackle. He's going to struggle. He's 6'5" and like 360. He is going to struggle to be a consistent pressure maker in the NFL. He has a massive frame, which means it's a hell of a lot easier for offensive linemen to get inside and get on him. It doesn't mean I'm not saying he won't be successful, because I have heard people talking about him being Vita Vea. But even Vita Vea, who I just complimented as being one of the best one techs that we've seen in the past decade, the most sacks he's ever had in his career was 6.5 in one season. And that was 5 years into his career before he got to that point. Another thing with Sweat is he has pretty slow get off. And part of that is because he's 360 pounds. I'm not in any way saying he's a bad player. I'm just saying, do the New Orleans Saints need a one tech? And should they spend their only other top 100 pick? I personally would say no. But I do understand what he can turn into, which is a really, really good player. But I just don't feel like he is a need for the Saints. I feel like he could be really cool, really good, but I just don't feel like he fits anything they need, even though he has some like really scary, cool things, like the fact that man can run a 5-second 40 weighing over 350 pounds. That's just scary, very scary. But he doesn't have a quick get off, and he doesn't have the pass rush potential for me to think that that second round value is warranted. But I do love that he's available, like he's healthy. I do love that he's a fantastic space eater. So we do a live draft podcast. Would like to watch your insight live. I'll be honest, Ted, don't know. Probably not. Probably not. But just because I have my other streams, like my gaming streams and stuff, that I'll probably do instead. That doesn't mean I won't give opinions and stuff. But I don't think I'm going to live stream all the days and all the picks like we've done in the past. But I'll think about it. I do miss it. It's a lot of fun to do. It's a lot of fun to do. I will say that. I think we need to be prepared to take a tackle in the first round. I'm always prepared for that, John. I've got no idea with taking, or no issue with taking that in the first round. I personally love it. I personally love it. All right. He will eat up space. He's going to eat up space and rundowns that rotate pass downs. Sure. But guess who already does that? Calvin. Colin Saunders. And Colin Saunders does it pretty well. I don't think Colin Saunders is the best one tech in the NFL, but you just signed him to a multi-year contract. He is 27, turning 28. I'm looking at his profile right now. So he's still young. He's still probably got a good 2 years of good play left in him. And yeah, I think you've already got the position filled, right? He's a reliable player. He played 17 games with 17 starts last year. Very low missed tackle percentage, combined for 57 total tackles. I mean, those are good numbers. It's not impressive like in crazy numbers, but it's solid. I think you've already got it. So I think you already got it. Also, good chance we take 2 tackles in the first and second, especially with the uncertainty with Ramczyk. I'd be very shocked if that happened. Sure, it's possible, but I feel like that has a low probability of happening. Given the history of this team's draft strategy, they don't tend to draft for need. They draft for BPA, with the exception of Dennis Allen's obsession with a certain type of defensive end, which I don't think is going to happen this year because Dennis Allen got his defensive end in free agency. Chase Young fits every box DA looks for. Ultra athletic, has the same height, weight profile that he looks for, and the man has an injury history. He checks every Dennis Allen box for defensive end. So I don't think you'll see them do the same thing this year that they did with Isaiah Foskey and Peyton Turner and Marcus Davenport. So I think you're going to see a pure BPA run, but we'll just have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. But I also think that Trevor Penning, year 3, I said the same thing about Cesar Ruiz. Year 3, he has a legitimate shot, or should be given a legitimate shot to prove that he's a starter. Year 3, Cesar Ruiz went from being a guy who was mid at best, was really honestly bad, to being good, and then last year had another solid season. I think Penning needs to have the same opportunity in year 3 to show that his technique is developed. He certainly has great potential. We'll just wait and see if that actually turns into anything. But for now, we sit and wait. Still think you address the position, by the way. Please don't interpret that as me saying you don't go after a tackle because you have Penning. You absolutely do. But that Penning is still here, and he still has the same potential he did 2 years ago. And you hope with a good offensive coach, that can be brought out of him, and he can become an effective player. All right, look, boys and girls. Trying to keep these short and sweet as we get closer and closer to the draft, and we're probably going to do some special draft episodes. But if you haven't already joined the Discord, listen to this on your way home from work or to work tomorrow. Share us out with your friends, family, baby mama, baby daddies, everybody else who's in Who Dat Nation. I appreciate y'all. Who Dat, God bless. I can't believe it's already been 40 minutes of the show. Deuces, thank y'all for being here. Thank you for supporting me. And we'll see you on the next one.